Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. I am so excited to be talking with April Speight today. She is a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. April, it's so good to see you again. I feel like I know you very well purely because I follow you on Twitter and we've talked on the internet, but it's nice to actually get to talk to you face to face.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much, Cassidy. I'm happy to finally have a chance to sit down and have a conversation with you. How are you doing?
Oh, I am great. I'm very, very excited to ask you some hard-hitting questions today.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I know this, not everybody knows this. You didn't take a very traditional path into tech. Would you mind telling us how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, no problem. So I started out in luxury fashion as a menswear stylist as well as a visual merchandiser. But I realized that as much fun as that was, it wasn't going to necessarily be a good thing for me with regards to financial stability in the future. So I decided to take a look at what sort of skills I did have and what I could potentially transfer elsewhere. And so I had a certificate in business project management. So I said, all right, I'll become a project manager. Through my job search, I learned that at the time, a lot of the jobs that were available on the market required IT experience, which is not what I had. So I had to find a way to present the skills I did have and overlap with what was being asked of me. So having transferable skills made a big difference. I got a job as an intern. I was eventually given full-time employment, which was great. And then over time, I've been a project manager. When I got to Microsoft, I became a program manager. I was creating content for fun on the side, and I did it just for fun. But then I realized it would be even more fun if this was a full-time job. And so that's how I landed here in advocacy. But that also came with learning a whole new technology, which was spatial computing. So I've been doing that now for almost a year and a half now, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
That is so awesome. And I feel like there's quite a few of us in the advocacy world where we discovered it and we're like, oh, this is a cool job. It's definitely a fast learning experience depending on the avenues you take with it. But it's such a cool job and I'm glad you got to that spot too.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I love it here. I would say for me, what's always been most important is making sure that folks, A, know the technology, and B, they're getting the help that they need, and C, they're just aware of what's available. So, what I love about advocacy is that unlike marketing, we're not there to sell. We're more so there to expose, bring awareness, and then to also help out. So, it's great having that sort of role. Unlike when working in fashion, it's fairly very sales oriented, and I did not like that at all. So it's good to not have to worry about that, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. It's a whole focus on just the developer's experience with a different technology or platform or thing. And it is very separate from marketing and from engineering, and yet it kind of intertwines the both in a cool way.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. But yeah, still get a chance actually to work with marketing and engineering. But to your point, that's not what we do, and I love that.
Yeah. So, speaking of making all kinds of cool content, congratulations on publishing a book. You published your book, Bite Sized Python, An Introduction to Python Programming. What has the response to the book been like? What is it like to see people have your book and experience it with this thing that you made?
Yeah, it's a very interesting feeling. And to this day, I have yet to actually see it in the bookstore. Everyone else approaches me and they take pictures too, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I saw your book at Barnes and Noble." And I'm like, I'm the only person that hasn't seen it out in the wild. So hopefully I'll get a chance to go to Barnes and Noble soon to do that. But in general, it's been a really great feeling. I always just like to see myself as a resource. So knowing that I'm able to provide that help with people who want to get started with Python, and even though the book was more so written for children, I couldn't even tell you how many like adults have come to me and they found the book to be really helpful. Also, the amount of emails that I've gotten from people as well. So it's a really good feeling, I would say.
Yeah, and you learned so much by teaching too. I like did you surprise yourself by learning as you were writing this together and describing things a certain way so that way it could be approachable by children and the adults that love it?
Yeah, I can definitely say I learned a lot. And I think when you are book writing, especially a technical book, you really have to humble yourself and you realize that you don't know as much as you thought you knew. And that becomes really evident when you're working with the technical editor. So I chose my technical editor. It was someone that had critiqued my work in the past. And he also had done Python for years and have also authored books. And very glad to have him in my corner. Even now, with my second book that I've been writing, there's just been a lot more that I've had a chance to learn. But the good thing is now, if someone were to ask me something in the future, I'm like there to answer their questions. And with the second book focused on Visual Studio Code, whenever we have something going on internally that somehow ties into VS Code, I'm like, okay, I know the answer to that. I want to help out. Here's some more context. So
Yeah, you learn it so deeply when you're trying to explain it to other people.
yeah, it's good though, because like before, I was really just using VS Code to code, if you will. But there's so many features available. And for me, I've focused on just the ones that are more pertinent for Python developers. But there's so many different features within the editor that can really help streamline your process of coding and also to focus more on the coding rather than just various other aspects of like the development process. But in any case, I love it. I will always promote VS Code every single day. But yeah, just there's always a lot more to learn than what you think you know.
Totally. Okay, so well, let's talk about the Python angle of this then, because Python has managed to stay around and be popular for a pretty long time, especially with machine learning and everything, despite how relatively old it is. Why do you think it has stayed around so long? What do you think has contributed to the longevity of this language?
I think for Python, it's a very approachable language for someone that's getting started. And if I look at this from a beginner's perspective, what I've noticed is when folks are asking, what should I learn first? What should I learn first? And for me, whenever anyone asks me, it's always a matter of, okay, what do you have the most of like interest in? And it's like, do you want to work on how websites look, for example? Then take this path. But for folks who want to get their hands a little more, I won't say deeper in the weeds, because every language, if you will, has its like place in the development process. But for folks who want to do more so backend, that's where Python starts to come into play. And I think for the fact that it's not too, for me, it's not too like over my head with getting started. The fact that it is very approachable, I think, makes a big difference. And plus, you can do a lot with Python as well. And you know, as you may know, as you look at trying to do the same thing across different languages, some things are simpler to do in one language over others. And I found that to be the case with Python. So I think, especially from that getting started perspective, that's what keeps the spirit alive with Python. And that's why I personally continue to use it, because I just think things are done simpler in
Yeah.
Python.
Yeah, I admit I've said a few times that I'm kind of jealous of developers today who are learning, because some of the stuff that they're able to learn with now, whether it's Python, JavaScript, any of these languages that have a lower barrier to entry, there's so many resources now, and it's amazing to be able to just see how fast people can learn and pick it up and run with it and get deep in the weeds, like you said.
Yeah. And when I wrote the first book in the acknowledgments, I believe it is, I started out by thanking all the content creators. And I even mentioned to your point that when I started out, there were not this many resources available. I didn't have the luxury of hopping on YouTube and finding tutorials for very like distinct things that I couldn't figure out. But nowadays, there's just so much content available. And I know for some folks, they may see that as a negative thing with regards to it just being so many tutorials on like the same concepts. But the reality is, we all don't necessarily grasp the information in the same way as we would watching like different types of tutorials. And that's why I personally started, because when I started doing tutorials, they all had a fashion focus to it as well. And so whenever folks will come across my tutorials, it was that aha moment because I related it back to the whole fashion thing. So I think as people want to continue to create content, or people who are just starting out and want to create, when I'm asked, does it even make sense to create content just based on how much is available? I'm just like, yeah, because we all provide a different way to teach, and you never know how someone is going to be able to grasp what you teach in your way as opposed to whatever currently exists right now.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to do a bit of a topic change because you work in spatial computing and you touched on this a little bit already. It's so interesting to me. And how did you actually get into this particular corner of the tech world?
Yeah, I was at an airport waiting for a flight, and I had saw a demo on Twitter for one of the Microsoft events that we were having. And I thought it was the coolest thing because the speaker on the stage had on the HoloLens, and she was doing real-time speech translation. That was the part that I actually thought was cool, was the real-time speech translation, because she was speaking English. I believe the other individual on the other end was speaking Japanese. And so I said, oh my goodness, I want to do this. And I really liked it because I have a linguistics background in undergrad. So communication is my thing. And from there, I just asked the community literally on Twitter, what do I need to get started? And so many different people from the XR community chimed in with the resources. And then that's how I got in contact with the folks here at Microsoft for the mixed reality team. And I was very fortunate to get set up with a device. I also had gotten some help from the folks at Magic Leap as well. So reaching out to the community, asking for how to get started, and then having people to actually provide me the tools that were necessary to get started made a big difference. And that's how I ended up in advocacy within spatial computing, because I had spent, oh my goodness, 6 months just like trying to onboard to learn this technology because I was very, very serious about it. And it all paid out in the end. But even like today, we're still learning. There's still new things that are coming out. I know, like recently, for example, Microsoft Mesh was announced, and we're still learning that. And that's what I like about working in this area, is that no one can know everything. There's always something new coming out. And then when that new thing comes out, everyone has to go learn it. So there's like so much more opportunity, I would say, as opposed to just sticking with like a language, for example, because if you think like Python's not really going to change. I mean, as the versions come out, there might be some small differences here and there, but it's not this new emergent technology. And that's why I like being in this area. But learning overall, I would say it definitely took some time, but still learning today.
Yeah, well, and as the world is learning and we're trying to make everything more equal access and improve things every single way, we benefit from having a more inclusive world. And I love seeing the work that you're doing in bringing people into it. And so many folks that we've talked to lately just are doing everything they can to bring this kind of technology to everyone and make it much more equitable. What are your thoughts on how technologists and leaders and just people in technology, how can we make changes in the right direction to continue pushing a more equitable, inclusive industry, world, everything?
Yeah, I would say from a technology perspective, we have to continue to come out with ways for folks to learn that are more approachable, I would say. So typically, like in the space that I'm in, it's more so making the onboarding process less than what it is. Providing low code, no code solutions as well make a really big difference, because not everyone wants to spend years learning, like in my case, C# to just create some 3D object floating around in the room. We should have ways to do things for folks who don't want to dive that deep into programming, but they want to create. And I think there's a lot of creative people out here, and I've been mentioning this a lot lately. There's a lot of untapped potential, but it's just that barrier to entry can be so high, and that's unfortunate. With regards to people and who are in the industry, I really think for the folks that are more privileged, it really helps when they're able to reach back and help the rest of us come forward. Because just to be very blunt, in the society that we're in, for those who are going to be the more privileged, unfortunately, they have more say. And so their voice is going to carry more weight in a room of decision makers. And so as they're able to put themselves out there and help promote us as well, and making sure that, we're not all hiring people who look the same, that also makes a difference too. So from a tech perspective, making the process of learning and using platforms more approachable. And then from a human perspective, making sure that we have someone in the room to provide that voice to make sure that we are providing a much more inclusive and equitable industry, if you will.
Yeah, there was a mentor of mine, and she once told me the phrase "lift as you climb," and just as you are moving up in the world, bring people with you and help lift people up, so that way they can get to where you were as you move forward, and continue to push everyone forward. And I think that it's a sentiment that everyone in tech needs to embrace more and more, because we are better together when everyone is making sure that people are successful.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And I think that's really, really important. And there's some internal things that I'm doing right now within my role to make sure that that happens, not only for people who work currently internally, but even if you want to go back even a couple more years, for people who are still in college, making sure that they have the exposure to the different technologies that we have, so that way we can put them, more even level from a skill set perspective, to make sure that they're ready. But a lot of it comes down to resources. And so if the same resources aren't provided for folks who aren't necessarily like the 1% in tech, then it puts them at a very big disadvantage. So yeah, completely understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have one last question for you, and this is mostly out of curiosity. You do so much. Professionally, personally, the state of the world, everyone's working from home. You do so many cool things. How do you take care of yourself and prevent burnout and make sure that you aren't just burning the candle at both ends?
Yeah, every day I eat lunch at 12 o'clock for an hour. Lately, I've been binging Mary Tyler Moore, and that's been probably one of the best things I can do for myself. When it comes to working, I start my days at 9 a.m. I end my days at 5 p.m. Very seldom do I work outside of those hours. And when work is over, work is over. I refuse to pull all-nighters, and I've been like that since college. I just don't believe in them. And then when the weekend comes, fortunately, I'm in a position where I can actually have all these restrictions. But then when the weekend comes, I don't do anything work related. That's where I have even more fun, I would say. I can actually do all the different hobbies that I have. I can go out and enjoy myself. And I think putting your foot down with regards to the restrictions that you're setting for yourself makes a really big difference. Because I seen this on Instagram recently, but it was like a tweet or a meme or something, and it had said something to the effect of, just because I'm free doesn't mean that I'm available, which is 100% true. That I think when folks assume that, oh, she says she's not doing anything right now, therefore she can do XYZ. No, that is not what that means. That means that this is time for myself, and I decide if I have the time. But unless you are vocal about that, or unless you put your foot down about that, people just assume, and they can take advantage of it. So I think it's very important to set those restrictions in place for yourself. And that's how I'm able to help manage my time.
I admire your ability to set those kinds of boundaries. That's something I've definitely struggled with, but I'm working on. But you're right, boundaries are life's mute button. And sometimes you just need to do that to keep your head on straight.
Yeah, makes a big difference. And then I know one thing that I spoke with some folks recently on is just the ability to say no. I have come to realize that it's not as easy for some people, whereas I'm like really great at saying no to stuff. But if you want to have a really good balance, and if you don't want to overwork yourself, that's one skill that I would highly suggest developing, is the ability to say no. And no is a full sentence as well. So as things come up, and if you know that you don't have the bandwidth for it, it's okay to say no. And I know that's a skill that some people need to build up the confidence to do, but it's okay.
Yeah, that is definitely one that I need to work on myself. Well, April, thank you so much for your time today. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you have a good one.
Thank you very much, Cassidy. I appreciate it.
All right, talk to you soon.